It's anyone can get it. Just put your kid in school and see if he brings one home.
I don't know how to tell you, but whatever illness has afflicted you has given you enormous cost. I just think you sound both. I mean, obviously serious, but also like mellow and chill. You know,
well, that's the whiskey. That part's the whiskey.
Is that what it is? I feel like I will do whatever you tell me to do. Basically, I feel that you could. Yeah, no, really. This is your opportunity. Whatever it is about this voice is just going. This perfect. Is sound good. I mean, you sound really good.
You know what I want? Let's end on time.
There are things I cannot do for you.
Do you know how long our last episode on this topic was?
I do know because I listened to it over the weekend and I was also shocked. It was an hour and 57 minutes or whatever it was. And I had the same reaction. I was like, Jesus. Did you re-listen to this? So this is the future of work that we did like 2.5 years ago.
Yeah. And it should be said, we're talking about remote work. So at the time, we are now in the future.
You're giving it away now. This feels like at the top already. I mean, are we gonna
just right into it?
Context. Nope. Look, I feel also, having re-listened to that, anyone that complains about our audio or the fact that we don't actually explain what we're talking about should go listen to Oxide and Friends from years past, where the audio was worse, and I don't feel we got to the topic any sooner.
Yeah, I mean, or even better, I wouldn't do that. Don't do that. You don't need to do that.
I thought it was good, actually. I thought it was a good discussion. I liked it.
It was good. Our audio was atrocious.
It was Twitter Spaces.
It was Twitter Spaces, and it would have been about half an hour shorter if we weren't discussing the various audio problems we were also experiencing.
We were discussing a lot of audio problems. Yeah, no, that was coming up a lot.
Yeah.
But I thought it was good. There was something I was wondering if you heard as well. So Lucas, known in that episode as your friend Lucas, exactly. Yeah. Lucas described being at Apple and using, I believe, WebEx for all communications. It's either WebEx or GoToMeeting, whatever it was. My brain; those are kind of in the same bucket in my brain. I believe it was WebEx, and he described a feature in WebEx where one of these new AI features where it would identify a hand gesture and then emit an emoji. And I'm like, is this where Apple got this, I think, regrettable idea?
Yeah.
Did this feature is the origin of this feature in some other species in WebEx? Does this like cross the species boundary into your MacBook?
Maybe, and I mean, I think we all went through this experience, and maybe we still are of our coworkers like doing some upgrade and then making some hand gesture and be like, what is going on?
That's
like, where is that coming from?
I don't know, anyone who is regretting the fact that we gave the topic at the top is now feeling much more comfortable that we're so far into the ditch on something completely unrelated. But the problem with that feature, and so the feature, for those who are unaware, the feature is that if you hold a gesture, the Mac will, at a seemingly a very deep level, so like seemingly like in the firmware for the camera, it is not happening at the level of, the Google Meet that you're in. If you hold the gesture, an emoji will explode. And this makes sense, I think, for thumbs up.
Sure.
Like thumbs up, it makes sense. And they just needed to stop at thumbs up. Then you'd be like, you know what? Thumbs up is the one that people want. That's the one that people makes sense. People hold the thumbs up. When they hold the thumbs up next to their face, they mean thumbs up. It's kind of a dumb feature. But the one that they wanted to go further, and they did other things. And this is where the mistakes compounded, because they got something that will emit. I believe if you hold your fingers up like jazz hands, it will do balloons.
Yeah, there's a whole litany of them. Double thumbs up, like, gives you some like light show. Oh no, pardon me. That's if you do like double. I tell my son it's double quiet coyote because like that's the hand signal he knows, but like double kind of like rock on.
Double quiet coyote, crisscross applesauce.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It does, and I would love to see. Remember when Game of Thrones had the Red Wedding episode of Game of Thrones, and there was a bit of a meme where people would video other people watching this particular episode that had this huge twist in it.
Yeah.
And wouldn't you watch a collection of people of organizations trying to figure out what the fuck just happened with the balloons that just went off on someone's camera.
Yeah, like
I could watch hours of that.
The reaction of someone accidentally responding with balloons and then, I mean, it's kind of mortifying, right? Like in a business setting.
It's like, Steve, what did you just do? It's like, I didn't do anything. It's like, that's not true. We all saw it. Like balloons just exploded on you. So it's like, you definitely did something. There's victim blaming, gaslighting. I mean, it's the works.
Yeah.
It was. So I wondered if, anyway, they may have gotten that from so they could have gotten that from WebEx, is what I'm trying to say. Where that Oxide and Friends, there's a clue in an early Oxide and Friends episode about the Wuhan bat for this feature being actually being from WebEx.
That's
that's the first thing I got to say. The second thing I got to say is I just want to go back, as long as we are, where the hell are we? Our episode from last week. First of all, have there been any repercussions for you? Have there been any legal repercussions? Has anyone reached out to you? Have you gotten any?
That's a great question. I was like, wait, hold on. It wasn't the RFD one. Oh, it's like, no, the one where I confessed about my half-truth during a deposition. That's right. No.
What I also love about that episode that I would like someone to play for me on my deathbed is when you're like, we're not going to talk about, we don't feel comfortable. This is what I feel comfortable talking about. And I'm like, I think we feel a lot more comfortable than that. And you're like, I don't think we do. I don't know. No, we do not feel comfortable. I'm like, yes, now is the time.
Yeah,
it's great.
You just closed your eyes, put my hand on the wheel, and stepped on the accelerator, and off the cliff we went.
I did. And then I feel like I did not adequately. I mean, I really was a co-conspirator in this. I just want to make that clear.
No, for sure. You're like, wow, Adam, I loved reading the thing you wrote. The thing I wrote.
Listen, pal, as I recall, you redlined all over the thing I wrote. We had having to workshop it for 3.5 hours.
Never 3.5 hours. I'll never get back. Right.
Exactly. Blog entry of Theseus pranking a CTO for his self-praising autobiography. But so. I did feel like there was one detail that just was kind of occurring to me later as I was reading the blog entries that I think it is worth. So just to catch people up from last week, there was Dave Hitz wrote this self-praising autobiography. We created a fake fan blog, wondering if thinking that this might get his attention, and he just chomped down on it. The one thing I did really love is when you got the kind of the letter from the email from him, right? Telling you like, look, the lawyers have some issues with this.
Yeah.
And you kept doing making the change that he requested and then making some other change as well that would be in the opposite direction. But you kept not following his directions precisely and forcing him to come back and be like, okay, thank you for taking down the NetApp logo there, but you've put the NetApp logo now. Now you're using it in 3 other places that you're not allowed to use it. It was really great. Is what I got to say. It was delightful.
It was a masterstroke.
Nonstop lawyers is the blog entry that describes your ultimate exasperation, because it feels like whatever you do, the lawyers are telling you to do something different, when in reality your alter ego was deliberately doing things incorrectly. It was really, anyway, chef's kiss. I thought it was really great. Good stuff. That's not why we're here. So we are here, and so people who do complain about us giving insufficient context may complain this time that we give too much context. I'm just going to warn you in advance, because this is a note that Andy Jassy sent last week on a return to the office mandate for Amazon. So Amazon, and I think this happened actually maybe just before we did our episode last time, 2.5 years ago, or around the same time, had a hybrid return to the office mandate. You return to the office for 3 days a week, which I mean feels, I don't know. I mean, what was your take on that at the time, Adam? Because I think it's, you are someone who, I mean, this is probably true for me as well, like really missed that in-person collaboration that we had in an office.
Yeah. I mean, I think in part this podcast was like an accidental consequence of that missing socialization.
I think you are absolutely right. Yeah. I think you are absolutely. I think that the path that this podcast took is very much a consequence of that. Because we talked about that earlier, that the thing that when people talk about what you have in the office that's so special, one of the things is junior engineers being able to get lunch with senior engineers, and for us that was getting dinner on Monday nights. And we've talked about that this podcast kind of serves that purpose, we think, or gets to some of that, of tapping into wisdom and letting people kind of gathering at the metaphorical bar, if you will, where the bar only serves Diet Cokes, as it turns out.
That's right.
So no, I think I think it's a very good point that this podcast is very much a consequence of that. So yes, so mixed feelings maybe 2.5 years ago, and I think it was interesting to re-listen to that conversation where because Lucas in particular was like, all right, hey, we seem to be kind of in praise of remote work. Can we kind of talk about some of the things we have lost here, some of the things that we only get from in-person collaboration? And which I think I actually want to come back to that because I think there's a lot of things we can talk about there. But this note, so Amazon had this kind of hybrid model, 3 days a week. You had to be in an office, which is where this thing begins to kind of teeter a little bit. It's not like the office because Amazon's not in one office. And do you know folks at Amazon currently? I should say operating under similar return to the office mandates. I'll tell you that you and I know someone in common, a technologist in common, who is at Amazon currently, and is his frustration with this is my team is not co-located with me at all. So I've got to drive for an hour and a half in pretty thick traffic to get into an office in which my team is not located, and I got to spend. And then I'm like just doing the thing I would be doing at home.
I feel like that is the story. Like, I think my greatest point of like socialization with other adults is like kids' birthday parties. Okay, that's just the phase of life I'm in. But like that that is like a story at everybody's like everyone has that story, right? Everyone has the story of like, I have to go to work, and it's kind of dumb because like when I'm home, I'm on Zoom calls with these folks, and like when I'm at work, I'm on noisier Zoom calls with these folks in much less convenient conditions and so forth. And I've like wasted or spent, or depending, the time to get there. So I think everyone's, whether it's Amazon or kind of you name it, everyone feels that kind of like Sisyphean, like I've got this, I'm in the office, the boulder's at the top of the hill. Now I'm on a Zoom call with a person who's at a different office. Thanks very much.
And I had to endure a long commute, and like I'm not going to be able to be there in time for my kid's soccer game this afternoon or this evening as a result. I mean, it just feels like it, and I think people are willing to accept. Certainly, I mean, I think you and I are both willing to accept. Yes, there's a chemistry, something you can have happen when you are in person that you don't necessarily get otherwise. I've been trying to replay my own career though, about the times when there's truly been that spark in a conference room at a whiteboard with dry erase markers. That's not the marker game. Perhaps a subject of its own. The marker game was great. Did you play the marker game much?
Oh, of course. Like Over the Light. We should do an episode on like in-office games. I want a call-in show where people do their best to describe their in-office games.
And people don't realize that because we are such oversharers, people think there is nothing about us or Oxide ourselves that we haven't shared. But in fact, perhaps our greatest innovation has been unshared. An office game that is, some of us acknowledge.
I mean, unshared insofar as like what? There's only one long wiki in the public on this. Oh, you mean on this podcast? Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'll have a fish pong episode, but like
at that point, we fish pong will be an Olympic sport, and I may not live to see it. You may not live. We may not live to see it, but it will.
There we go. I mean, I look forward to talking about Z-Ball. I'm just going to leave that as a teaser, but like an in-office game.
I'm so glad you said that. I'm like, I really want to talk about Z-Ball right now. I know it's like off topic, but like we can get in and out of Z-Ball pretty quickly, I feel.
Sure. I don't know. Go for it. Yeah. Get us in there.
Okay. So and this is like, this is an actual concrete in-office innovation. You're only going to get this one in the office because it requires everyone to physically be in the same room. So I think I believe that this glass is still in my house. I became very concerned. No, I became very concerned because I'm like, this is a historical artifact, and like one of the kids is just gonna like break it. I have a Solaris Zones glass. Don't know how many there are, and this glass was just drifting around the conference room in which we would have the D-Trace meeting. We had a weekly D-Trace meeting, I want to say.
That's right. That conference room is now like a graffitied wall in Facebook. I just want to tell you what happened to Nana's estate. Yeah, it got turned into a McMansion. Sorry.
Oh my God. Yeah, no, that cemetery is now a Chili's. It just feels like it's such a sad end for that you could actually find that spot a little more easily because it's close to a stairway.
Yeah,
because it's only the stairways remained. Like
I've been there. Like I've visited that hallowed ground, and it is.
I tried to take a photo of where my office was, and I was ushered out for taking a photo of like this confidential. Like I'm in a Facebook office. There's nothing there. Like, can we just like have some respect for this ancient burial ground? That I put a spell on that spot, and I'm convinced that
you're haunting it to this day.
I am haunting it to this day. So we had this Solaris Zones glass that had like drifted ashore in this conference room, and then somehow a ping pong ball enters.
No, I'm not sure. No, not a ping pong.
Was it not a ping pong ball?
Not. It was a foam ball that. This is really dating it. Do you remember cars used to have antennas? This is really true.
Go on.
It was a foam
Would you
ball.
put your phone on top of the antenna, or is this to get Wi-Fi in the car?
Yeah. Oh God, where do I start? Yeah. Let's just say yes. So your car had an antenna, and it was like one of these little foam balls that you would stick at the end of. God, I feel like I'm telling a story about
this doesn't sound. This is a dream. This doesn't sound coherent.
It sounds ridiculous.
Like then there were wires that you would stick out of your car, and there's a foam ball you'd stick on the wire. You're like, God, how long did you wake up yet? I mean, this dream has gone on forever. We had because this was also a giveaway, right? It was an
open Solaris.
It was.
Yeah.
Open Solaris antenna foam ball.
Oh God, this sounds so crazy.
This sounds like a group hallucination. This just sounds nuts.
Yeah.
So that is also in the conference room somehow. This really does sound dream-like. I don't know what either of these things, but as my recollection is that both those things are just kind of like there. And at some point, someone like a Paleolithic people discovering fire. Someone stared at the ball in their hand, stared at the glass on the table, and attempted to throw the ball in the glass, and Z-Ball was born.
Thus, yes,
not to be confused with any other game that is throwing a ball into a hoop. This is Z-Ball, and so it was 1 point if you were sitting in your chair and you could throw it into the glass in the middle of the table. Correct?
It was like a rectangle, effectively, like a kind of a oval, like a shaped table. And if you were on the short side, that was 1 point. If you were on the longer side, that was, if you're farther away, then that was 2 points. And if you were in the corner of the conference room, that was like a 4-pointer. There were a bunch of rules about like, it was like deuces wild.
If your chair was touching the back of the wall, it was worth 3 points, is what I want to say.
And there was like some doubling thing, like suddenly the stakes were higher if certain things happened.
And the ball would frequently bounce out of this thing, it should be said.
That's right.
And Mary was our program manager.
That's right.
Assigned to D-Trace for a hot second.
Yeah.
And the only thing I can remember about Mary is her one act, as far as I think we're both concerned with respect to D-Trace, is she came in, saw us playing Z-Ball, with all of us struggling to get the ball into the glass. Took the ball, standing up to the furthest corner of the conference room, sank it, and walked out.
Trained it. Unbelievable. Yeah.
Became a legend. Mary, you are
wherever you are.
Wherever you are, your legend lives on. It was okay. And that's the stuff that is only in the office moment. That is an important. I know it's look, that's important. That's part of our fabric. That's part of our oral history. That is So I actually don't want to dismiss it. Like that stuff is like important, you know?
So, I mean, the length of the walk we took you all on aside, I do feel like there's something deep in human DNA that causes office games to spawn from nothing, right? That like everyone has their in-office game that was conjured from the tchotchkes that happened to be left in a conference room.
The tchotchkes, from having to throw away the trash, from ordering the ping pong table and not having it show up and having to like invent something. It's like there is all of these things have these kind of these origin stories that are where these quotidian accoutrements of the office become the stuff of legend. I mean, surely every office has this, right? This is not just us.
No, for sure. 100% every office has it.
Meanwhile, every Oxide employee is like, is this their very long walk up to the Oxide return to the office mandate? So but these are the kinds of things you only get in an office. I do think, and when I kind of replay like the history, like, so there are, like, I've got those moments in the office. I've got the chariot race in the office.
Nope, with I'm out for that one.
Do you remember that each floor had the emergency chariot to evacuate someone?
Yeah, it was like a stretcher.
It was a stretcher with wheels, with like one set of wheels.
I don't know it was called a chariot, but please continue.
But it's like, obviously we're going to race these. Like, why would you? Who in their right mind would put this in the hand of?
That's right. It's a total apple of discord. I mean, just right to the fastest.
Absolute apple of discord. The prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until you're in your late 20s, folks. And we were at 22, 23, 24. Like, sorry, these things are getting raced. Well, 100%. So it's like, okay, yeah, you only get chariot races, you only get Z-ball, you only get the marker game, you only get fish pong. All these things that require the office for sure. True. And then I mean the things we talked about a slightly more serious note about the lunchtime conversation and so on. Okay, you get those things from the office. But I was trying to remember, like, when have I had like the work product has like that flash of work product has happened in the office at a whiteboard. And it's not like that it hasn't happened. And I could remember a couple of times in my career, but not very many. I mean, it's a small handful. And honestly, like, they kind of predate chat and they predate the things where those things happen today.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure,
like alternative forms where they could have potentially happened.
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Like, I mean, I remember you coming up with the simplifying assumption, for example, in D-Trace, which I think we talked about in the D-Trace episode. Yeah. That was at a whiteboard. That was the three of us at a whiteboard really struggling.
Yeah.
But on other breakthroughs, I remember working with other people, but the breakthrough itself often happened in the shower. It often happened alone in my office. It happened driving to work. It happened somewhere else,
Yeah. I like that you specified that you were alone in your office, but you didn't specify that for the shower. I'm just going to make note of that.
Yeah, listen, I
said what I said.
God, we had an apartment once with 2 shower heads. And fortunately, my wife and I have a shared disposition on this one, which is like, no. Shower solo activity that we can, sorry.
There we go.
You took us there. But so I think that like the idea that like something special happens that is technical, that is like creates artifact. I don't know. I really struggle. I feel like for every example I can come up with where that's happened, I feel I can come up with dozens where that's not the way it happened.
Yeah,
and it didn't require in-person collaboration.
I think there's this romantic idea we have of like cross-pollination too, where it's maybe not you struggling to solve a problem at a whiteboard that couldn't have been solved elsewhere, but rather it's the lunchtime conversation, or you walk and get in coffee, or you're doing a drive-by and you overhear something, and that's what spawns this kind of moment of inspiration. I even struggle more to come up with those kinds of examples where.
Yeah, I feel it's like most of those examples are like Z-ball and like chariot racing. Like, you know what? We should race these chariots. These things have wheels and we should race them. Like, I feel like that's the conversation that happened coming back from coffee. Like, why haven't we thought of this before? Like, absolutely, let's wait till this place clears out and it's on. We're racing these things.
I do like this idea of like, instead of fighting return to office mandates, people should instead say, we should return to office and get back to the days of Z-ball and chariot racing. as sort of like a way to undermine the return to office mandate. Like, no, we're on the same
Absolutely.
page. Like, let's get in the office and get racing.
I too believe we should be playing the marker game with my brothers and sisters. We should be playing. Mary should return for as the return of the Z-ball queen. Absolutely, yeah, for sure. I think that, but that's part of the problem with these RTO mandates is does not seem to be the angle like at all. And I think you could make a plausible case for that being the angle. But did you read this thing from Jassy?
I only read reactions. I didn't read his whatever he had written.
All right,
good. We're really going to read the tweet.
We're really going to read the tweet, and we're like, of course, anyone listening to this in the distant future is like looking at their watch, being like 25 minutes in, like slow clap. And I'm finally getting context. It's like you literally talked about a two-headed shower and chariot racing before you got to the top. Well, yes, here we are.
You're welcome.
Well, so first of all, it's like the subject is strengthening our culture and teams. And man, if that doesn't get every that just got to get you on high alert from when you get a CEO message about strengthening our culture and teams. And so, all right, I'm not going to read the whole thing. Although actually it is kind of worthwhile. So it's like, hey team, maybe we'll read the thing. Hey team, I wanted to send a note on a couple of changes we're making to further strengthen our culture and teams. Immediately anyone is like, who are we laying off? Like, can we just can we please get to it? There's clearly something radical that is going to be in this email. And it's like, okay, so how am I going to find? First, for perspective, I feel good about the progress we're making together. All right, a bunch of blather about progress. You're like, okay, next paragraph. That's not it. Next paragraph. When I think about my time at Amazon, I never imagined I'd be at the company for 27 years. My plan, which my wife and I agreed to on a bar napkin in 1997, was to be here for a few years and move back to New York City. Strike. Do not need that. Why is this here? Red line. I just feel like, so save it for the podcast. Like, you want to talk about your two-headed shower, do it in the podcast. Don't do it here. Like, why? Also, you're talking about having been in the company for 27 years. Is a really, really, really long time. And I think it's like, I was trying to think to myself, it's like, wow, that is like someone, I showed up at Sun in 1996. This is like getting a message from an executive talking about how they've been at the company since 1969. And that is, the company didn't exist in there were very few Silicon Valley companies that existed in 1969. Like, at that time, it would be like Intel.
Yeah.
That's kind of it. And to think like that is a very, very long time. And like, maybe that's something that you should look inward on this one. That's an extremely long time. And like, do you want, and so, okay. So, bar napkin, also like the agreement on the bar napkin. Isn't that weird? Why? Do you think that's true? First of all, did you really write that down? Like, show me the bar napkin. You wrote down an agreement on a bar napkin. Right. Have you ever written an agreement on a bar napkin? Like, that's a very transactional relationship to have with your spouse. This is weird.
That's right. Is the bartender also a notary? Like, what is this?
Bartender and notary. It's like, hey pal, I need you to witness this. Like, what? Jesus, are you guys getting divorced? What's going on? No. It's a prenup. We don't do prenups on napkins anymore after the litigation. Oh, okay, all right. This is an agreement about you, a job. What is going on? Are there clauses spelled out? Anyway, I've got a lot of.
No, sure, whatever. Get out your IDs. I need your thumbprint.
And I guess there's something wrong. He points out that he started as a level 5, which I get it. It's like super meaningful for if you're at Amazon. To me, it sounds like you're talking about, I don't know, like a video game or something. It sounds like you're talking about Mario Brothers or something. I don't know. Anyway, started out as a level 5.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. I started out as a mage. Okay, fine. So our culture is unique, and it's been one of the most critical parts of our success in the first 29 years. Okay, Jesus, I get to it. There's obviously a big announcement, but keeping your culture strong is not a birthright. You have to work at it all the time. When you consider the breadth of your business, their associated growth rates, the innovation required across each of them, and the number of people we've hired in the last 6 to 8 years to pursue these endeavors, it's pretty unusual and will stretch even the strongest of cultures. This is where this is not written by GPT, because GPT would not give you any of this blather. This is just kind of like, all right, where are we going? Strengthening our culture remains a top priority for the S team and me. Does anyone know what the S team is? Is that like that's clearly like, I don't know, supervisor team, Studley team. I don't know what the S team is. Do you know what the S team is?
No,
I don't know. I think about it all the time. I think about strengthening culture all the time. We want to operate like the world's largest startup. That means having a passion for constantly inventing for customers, which they do. I think customer focus is great at Amazon. Strong urgency for big opportunities. It's a race. High ownership, fast decision-making, scrappiness, and frugality. Deeply connected collaboration. You need to be joined at the hip with your teammates when inventing and solving hard problems, and a shared commitment to each other. And you're like, okay, where is this going? 2 areas that I'm thinking about in the last several months are, one, do we have the right organizational structure to drive the level of ownership and speed we desire? You're like, okay, it's a reorg mail.
Right.
And two, are we set up to invent, collaborate, and be connected enough to each other and our culture to deliver the absolute best for customers in the business that we can? We think we can do better on both. Okay. On the first topic, you're like, okay, the reorg. This is the reorg. We've always thought to hire very smart, high judgment, inventive, delivery focused, and missionary teammates. What do you feel about that sentence? This is another one where it's like, ChatGPT doesn't write this one. ChatGPT,
no.
you have a better sentence.
No, for sure.
I just think it just high judgment as an adjective. I don't think you can just do that actually. And missionary as an adjective, I don't know. Isn't missionary a noun? I don't know.
I think I'm already like so skimming over the part of like just what is happening.
Where are we going?
Yeah.
Do I work here or not? Like I need to go look for a job if I don't work here anymore. Can we just get here? We've always wanted the people doing the actual detailed work to have high ownership. I like that. As we have grown our teams as quickly and substantially as we have the last many years, we have understandably added a lot of managers. In that process, we have also added more layers than we had before. It's created artifacts we like to change, e.g. pre-meetings for the decision meetings, a longer line of managers feeling like they need to review a topic before it moves forward, owners of initiatives feeling less like they would make recommendations because the decision we made elsewhere, emails that go on and on and on and on and on, etc. Okay, I may have added that last bit. I mean, it's like... okay, like you realize, I mean,
it's very
there's an irony here.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's an irony here.
Yeah.
This is not... most decisions we make are two-way doors, and such we want more of our teammates feeling like they can move fast without unnecessary processes, meetings, mechanisms, and layers that create overhead and waste valuable time. You're like, meanwhile, I've got the stopwatch on how much of my own valuable time I've spent reading this, as do you, dear listener, have the stopwatch down and be like, you started reading this thing like 7 minutes ago. Where are we going? Here, are we almost like, you actually, you know what? I want a lot less context for all future episodes. Thank you very little. So we're asking each S-team organization to increase the ratio of individual contributors to managers by at least 15% by the end of Q1 2025. Adam, given our discussion last week, is that a founder mode sentence or a manager mode sentence?
Oh, clear founder mode, right? Getting rid of the managers. Well, I guess there are two ways to improve any kind of ratio, right? Improve the numerator and improve the denominator.
So this is, I feel we could have a great Lincoln Douglas debate about whether this is founder mode or manager mode, because you're right. I mean, eliminating the managers, I immediately think founder mode. Totally. But it's also, you're not actually eliminating the managers. You're only increasing the ratio of contributors to managers by at least 15%. By the way, I can hire more. I can actually, if I go hire more contributors,
that's right.
I get more recs. And it's 50% by the end of Q1 2025. It's not exactly tomorrow.
Got it. You're creating potentially some perverse incentives in empire building to encourage the manager mode you've already embraced.
Exactly. I think this is like, I feel that this is, I mean, I feel like we've got a founder mode, manager mode duality in this sentence. And I feel that it's kind of in the eye of the beholder. I think it's kind of intended as founder mode, but I think it'll be read as manager mode. I think middle managers will be like, got it. I get 15% more heads that I get to go hire against.
I mean, it would be like the most founder mode end to this email would be, I myself have terminated 15% of my reports.
But I'm not going to tell you which 15%.
That's right.
I will save that for a future email. Well, were you at Sun when McNeely did his rule of 11?
Do you remember this? That was already in place. Yeah. I mean, that was like a tenet of management by the time I got to Sun, I believe.
Yeah. So he decided that, I mean, again, this is like in an active founder mode, had realized that there were, and this was definitely true of the company, where you'd have, and this is true whenever you get, blossoming middle management, and then you get some reorgs, and then you end up with like, oh, wait a minute, this VP has got 2 directors reporting to them. Each director has got 3 managers reporting to them. Each of the managers only has 1 individual contributor. Like, this is an entire organization with like 20 people and
with like one person doing the work.
with one person doing the work. And so McNeely instituted this rule of the rule of 11 that everybody had to have 11 reports. And I remember it's like, as you're an engineer, you're like, all right. So I yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, let's go take a machete to some of the middle management undergrowth. And yeah, that makes sense. It was never enforced. And McNeely, to his credit, enforced it for himself, but then didn't actually and then his, the folks that worked for him didn't do it. It just wasn't done. And there were so we ended up with the rule of 11 was not enforced.
But what you're describing is also a Sun pathology, which is like,
oh, for sure,
very, very little was enforced, right? Like, I think we were strong on leadership and a little bit light on follow through. Very light on follow through. Right.
Yes, organizational mechanics, not a strength, absolutely not a strength. And and you had this kind of middle management class that was kind of looking after itself and was so. All right, so we have this sentence that has this duality to it. I mean, it does. The next sentence maybe clarifies it a little bit. Having fewer managers will remove layers and flatten organizations more than they are today. If we do this work well, it will increase our teammates' ability to move fast, clarify, and invigorate their sense of ownership, drive decision-making closer to the front lines where it most impacts customers and the business, decrease bureaucracy, and strengthen our organization's ability to make customer lives better and easier every day. It's like, woof, how about that sentence have 15% fewer words in it, pal? That's a bit of a monster. We will do this thoughtfully, and our PXT team will work closely with our leaders to evolve our organizations to accomplish these goals in the next few months. It's like, okay,
I have been meaning to ask, how do I get on our PXT team?
Oh, I've listened. If I told you that, then what would be the point of the PXT team? If everyone could figure out how to get on the PXT team. Yeah, I've got no idea what. Exactly. With the PXT team is. Clearly, you've now any manager has now stopped reading the rest of this email and is now jockeying for the PXT team.
That's right. Who do I know on the PXT team? What favors do they owe me?
What favors do they owe me? By the way, parenthetical. By the way, I've created a bureaucracy mailbox for any examples any of you see where we might have bureaucracy or unnecessary process that's crept in and we can root out. To be clear, companies need process to run effectively, and process does not equal bureaucracy, but unnecessary and excessive process or rules should be called out and extinguished. I will read these emails and action them accordingly. Okay, which is a little bureaucracy suggestion box. I kind of, I don't know what to think about that. I mean, it's like, it feels like that's, anyway, whatever. To address the second issue of being better set up to invent, collaborate, and be connected to each other and our culture to deliver the absolute best for customers in the business, we've decided that we're going to return to being in the office the way we were before the onset of COVID. When we look back over the last 5 years, we continue to believe that the advantages of being together in the office are significant. I've previously explained these benefits in this February 2023 post. So I guess this was after we recorded by quite some margin. But in summary, we've observed that it's easier for our teammates to learn, model, practice, and strengthen our culture. Collaborating, brainstorming, and inventing are simpler and more effective. Teaching and learning from one another are more seamless, and teams tend to be better connected to one another. Also, there's many more chariot races, Z-ball, and marker game.
What I appreciate is he is putting his arm around us, walking us right up to the edge of the cliff, which we think he's going to push us off. And then he's like, actually, could you just come to the office more? Like, oh, thank you. You're not pushing me off the cliff? It's like, no, I'm not pushing you off the cliff. No, it's not like that.
I'm exactly pushing you off the cliff. when you're done with this, you're going to want to jump off the cliff. That's the kind of, so if anything, the last 15 months we've been back at the office at least 3 days a week has strengthened our conviction about the benefits. And I feel that like this is the bit that I feel this is kind of just like double talk about the benefit of being in an office. And I feel that like for those people that have been commuting to be on Zoom calls with people that are in other far-flung offices, this is not going to resonate. This is going to feel like, wait a minute. No, if anything, the last 15 months has shown how stupid this thing is. And that the fact that, so they've been taking attendance. And in particular, so your manager will get a report of like when you badge in, and there's something called coffee badging, I am led to understand, where you go to badge in, you get a cup of coffee, and then you split. And they want to crack down on coffee badging. You're just like, oh man, this is not taking attendance. That's not what things were prior to COVID. Prior to COVID, you were not taking attendance.
No, I mean, you figure like for the folks for whom going to the office 3 days a week was great, they're maybe going 4 or 5 days a week. Like if you're actually seeing that benefit, and so much of it comes down to trust. Like if you trust your folks are doing the right thing for themselves and for the team and for the product and for their teammates and so forth, they're doing what they need to do. They're going in 4 or 5 days a week, whatever. But for the folks who are going in 3 days a week to sit on Zoom calls, for the other folks who are in 3 days a week in some other location, it just sounds crazy.
Well, and this is, I think you've hit on something that's really big and important here, which is just the breakdown of trust here.
Yeah. And
I mean, this is kind of telling people by fiat how they're effective and not actually letting them figure out how they're effective. I mean, because what you want a team a team ultimately needs to deliver an objective of the business, right? And you want them to prioritize that with urgency, to have customer attention and so on. But this is where you're like, you know what? And also like no more blue jeans in the office. It's like, okay, why? Like, I actually don't see how this is that different from a dress code. And like all the arguments you can make in favor of this, you can also make in favor of a dress code. Like, what are we doing here with this?
Yeah.
And especially if you are feeling like, I'm commuting in for Zoom calls, like you're not. No, this just feels I think, or it's going to feel disingenuous. So yeah, and I should actually also just say, Adam, maybe this is a good juncture, that one of the things that listening to that previous episode from 2.5 years ago did remind me of. I did love the call-in aspect of that. Yeah. So I do want to get other people up here. I don't want to just merely.
Yeah.
It's be all about C-ball and chariot races.
Or it could be. Maybe we'll have a dedicated episode for that. But I would, now having read the full context, I'd love to hear what other people are seeing in their organizations and like what they're, how things are changing, if there's a return to office mandate or if there's something more progressive, and like what's motivating these things.
So I want you to know that I received the subtext that you would like me to not read the rest of this very lengthy email. But yes,
we're not even done. Holy smokes!
No, we're not done. No, we're not done. I mean, it's fine. It has actually but it goes on for another 4 paragraphs. And doesn't really add much although it does say the next paragraph is no, it goes on for 5 more paragraphs. Let me get 1 more paragraph in, because before the pandemic, not everyone was in the office 5 days a week, every week. If you or your child were sick, or if you had some house emergency, or if you were on the road seeing customers and partners, or if you needed a day or two to finish coding in a more isolated environment, people work remotely. I love that, like, of those examples, like, first of all, if your child is sick, like, aren't you taking you allow employees to take a sick day, right? You would allow an employee to stay home.
Yes. There is sort of a Dickensian,
before the pandemic, not everyone was in the office for 5 days a week. Some people were dead, and that was, and that was understandable. That was fine. We understood that tragedies happen.
The death was impediment to full productivity.
That's right. You some sort of house emergency. Okay, that feels like it's also a sick day. If you're on the road seeing customers or partners, you're like, you cannot be serious. Like,
it's like, oh, I don't have to go to work that day. Thanks, boss.
Thanks, boss. Okay, thanks. By the way, I am at work, out on the road, seeing customers and partners. So I get okay. I'd forgotten that was part of my hobby project. Or if you needed a day or two to finish coding,
so I don't have to take vacation to finish the project. Oh, that's awesome. This is flexible.
We'll split the difference. We'll take half those days as vacation.
Take them unpaid. That's fine. It's not vacation.
This was understood and will be moving forward as well. It's like, okay, great. But before the pandemic, it was not a given that folks could work remotely 2 days a week. And that will also be true moving forward. Our expectation is that people will be in the office outside of extenuating circumstances like the ones mentioned above. At least 2 of them are work, by the way. So extenuating circumstances, including work. Or if you already have a remote work exception approved through your S-team leader. And then just the final paragraph to read. We are also going to bring back assigned desk arrangements. So I guess that was that going on. Hey, it looks like you've got your own desk here. I'm not sure what you're complaining about. So, and then it goes on. But yeah, there we go. That's the context. And I just think that, like, even if you want people back in the office, I feel there's a much better way to position this. And so here's the question I've got just about this is, because many people are like, look, you are overthinking it. I think we even had someone on the internet who's just like, yeah, it's a shadow layoff, like short episode. They don't want to get people to quit. They don't have to pay them severance. And I'm like, I think that is overly reductive, because I feel are they really so cowardly as a management class at that company that they can't just lay people off? And if they don't pay people severance, don't pay people severance. Yeah. Severance is not something that's something that companies do because they feel a responsibility to their employees. But like, if you want to, like, you don't have to do that.
Yeah.
So like, just do that. To me, like, that's actually not the answer.
I totally agree. And Amazon is a lot of things, but I don't think they're stupid. And like, just letting some subset of your employees opt out is pretty stupid, right? It's an opportunity to make sure that, like, the least productive employees stay and the most productive employees walk out.
It is. Well, and so the other thing is, like, I agree with you, they're not stupid, but they surely must know that so much, yes, collaboration is an important part of work. So is that quiet time when you are working by yourself. And you need that quiet focus time. And that often is really hard to get in an office. And surely they know that the things that we actually build happen in that quiet time, that focus time, right? And this is where you get to, like, so here's my theory on this, by the way. I think that this is not rational. I think this is emotional. So my theory is that you get people who have lost their own sense of what their contribution is to an organization. They don't write code. They don't operate a service. They are, like, their job is to lead the organization. And so they go into an office that doesn't have any people in it. And like, I just don't know what I do. Like, what value do I add? Like, so is this, like, not to go too Citizen Kane on you, but is this like Andy Jassy's search for meaning?
I think there's something to that. I think there's something to that. I think there also I think you're right about the emotional aspect of it. And that sort of shock of, like, where is everyone? I think there's a lack of trust, which I would also chalk up into, like, sort of a paranoia. But I think there may also be, like, a financial aspect to it, like a sunk cost fallacy. Like, we're paying for all this. So why aren't people using it?
Yes. Yeah, I think that right. I think so too. And then I think also, just like, there's something, you're at a startup and it's like, it's 8 p.m. on a Thursday and everyone just ate pizza and they're going back and they're all working and it just feels like, we're so scrappy.
Right.
And it's like that, like, is that the past that he's trying to get to? That kind of, like, nostalgia for a company that is, and does he feel like, no, this feels ossified, even though, like, you're not actually looking at the work product. You're looking at this physical artifact that actually doesn't have necessarily that much to do with the work product.
Yeah.
I don't know. All right,
No, I
so there
think
we
you're
go.
on
That's
something.
why I just want to get my crazy theory out there. That this is my rosebud theory. I
don't think it's crazy at all. I think I think there's something to it. I don't know how to like sort of evaluate that. Like I wonder how we'll kind of shake that out over time, but I'm going to definitely keep it in mind.
Well, the other thing I wonder about is like I just feel like if you wanted to give this message, right? So you, Andy Jassy, and by the way, I did the experiment of having ChatGPT write a message to the company about returning the office. Wrote like a much crisper email and much more uplifting. I just feel like you could do it in a way that would feel much more uplifting and much less punitive and much less like it's resorting to coercion. Yeah, I want to hear other people's experiences. So, like, are people enduring office mandates now? Return to office mandates. What? How is it going?
And we've invited Matt, also known as my friend Matt.
God, you just claim everybody.
Yeah, exactly right. But Matt, I don't want to like tee up too much. So just what's on your mind?
Thanks for having me. Long time listener, second time caller. Very proud of that. I think. So I worked for Broadcom, previously VMware. We've just gone through the acquisition, and we went from a company that said work from anywhere and encourage people to move out of the Bay Area during COVID and live wherever you want. We understand remote work is very valuable. Transitioning to a culture that is 100% be in the office 5 days a week. Not dissimilar to the Amazon mandate. I think the reasoning behind it was a little bit different, where it wasn't we strengthen our culture, it was this is our culture, and if you don't like it, we understand. You can find another opportunity. And so, I think we've been going through a lot of the same challenges of being told to come to the office, but, Brian, you joke, like, people don't have assigned seats. There's not enough seats for people to come to the office. There's not conference rooms, so, people are coming to the office and they need to have a meeting and can't do it. And so I think a lot of the frustration, people do see the frustration of why am I commuting and is there actual value in it? But I think kind of what you both alluded to is previously when people came to the office, they saw a benefit in coming to the office, or at least they had some of the cultural things that they like, meeting people, talking about different things, working with different teams, all of that stuff. And the biggest thing that I've seen frustrating people is that they're mandating to come back to the office, but then they're actively not doing anything to make it easy for people to come back to the office. And so that's where people are sort of saying, like, well, if this is so important and we're really trying to strengthen our culture and embrace it and make it stronger, why are you making it harder for everybody to do their job such that being in the office is a detriment as opposed to a benefit? And so I think that's one of the things where it's really sort of made people question what's the underlying motivation. And, I don't want to call Brian a conspiracy theorist, but sort of leading them down that rabbit hole of, okay, what's the real meaning behind this and what are they trying to accomplish? And then the only other thing that I would...
Well, what is it? Yeah, what do you think they're trying to accomplish? Sorry, I mean...
I think one of the things that is different about Broadcom that has been sort of a revelation for me is previously I've worked at, largely software companies. Some companies we also sold hardware, but I wouldn't call us hardware companies. Broadcom has a pretty big background in hardware where a lot of the people doing work literally have to be in the office to do that work. And so when COVID shut down labs and foundries and all of these places where people worked, it had sort of a very material impact on the business. And I think that sort of caused, in leadership's mind, like that was something that was really scary to them and sort of an existential threat to the business. And so, them having that background where you had to be at work and you could no longer do it, I think, caused more panic than I would expect to at a pure software place.
But can we call bullshit on that though? That's not, in so many different regards, right? In that it's, first of all, so much of hardware is software. Yeah, right. Where you're using EDA tooling to develop, whether you're developing an ASIC or you're doing a board or you're doing soft logic. You're doing, and actually, Nathaniel on our team has got a great blog entry on how you build a hardware team with a distributed workforce. Sorry, Matt. I'm sure that I'm telling you the things you already know, of course.
No, Brian, but again, I think you go back to it, right? And you say, like, well, Andy Jassy's sitting there being like, if there's nobody in the office, am I doing my job? If you grew up in a culture where the people working on hardware were sitting in a room working in a lab,
yeah,
right? Like, again, I think it's the thing that you remember and the thing that you connect to, and what was critical and what was successful. It doesn't mean it's rational, right? But like, I think those are things that then feed into, okay, well, that's the culture that made me successful. It's worked. I don't want to move away from it. Therefore, it should work for everybody. Let's make everybody go do it.
But in this regard, though, Matt, I do think it does look like a dress code. You know what I mean? Where it's like, no, like engineers wear a tie in the office. Like, why are, and part of the reason that and Tom Lyon on here has talked about the kind of the West Coast companies versus the East Coast companies, and how all the East Coast companies got kind of disrupted by the West Coast companies in the 80s, in part because McNeely's famous dress code for Sun was "you must." And that was there was a time in which like that was iconoclastic, and you're like, we are the idea. It's like, yeah, your idea of what an engineer is changing, and this engineer is in flip flops, and they're developing something that is a chip, and they're doing it in flip flops. It's like, yes, these things can both be true.
Well, I'm glad you raised that point, Brian, because we do have a dress code now. I have not been sent home from work yet for inappropriate or not meeting the dress code, which, for folks who don't know me, that's pretty much every day. But yes, according to our handbook, we do also have a dress code. So I don't know if the two things go together. I don't know where AWS stands on this one.
What's the dress code?
Sweet Jesus. Somebody. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Same question. Go ahead.
It's rather nebulous. It sort of says professional attire, like business attire.
That's not you. No, 100%.
Yeah, no, and I'm still looking for a lawyer if there's anyone on the call who's willing to represent me when this comes to a
head. Anyone wants to represent you? My co-host is a lawyer.
Yeah, happy.
An Leventhal employment lawyer would be happy to represent you in your dress code claim.
Yes,
I mean that is. Matt, that is great. I mean, that's obvious. That's terrible. I know this is what you're living, and I know that you're. This is not for your dress code is not our entertainment, but all of that said, and it's a bit shocking that they've got it's like you don't need to have if you need to have a dress code, something is because clearly, like if you are with someone for which you need to dress professionally, you will need to dress professionally, and if you are going into the office to work on an ASIC, you can wear flip flops, but it just goes to that same like undermining of trust.
And so Matt, what's the reaction been as this becomes more enforced? Like, are there some folks who are receptive to it and think it'll be a positive change, or are most folks, especially from the VMware culture, is it bugging them?
I mean, most folks have told me I do need to dress better. Sorry.
Yeah, this is an intervention.
Right. Oh, thank God there's a dress code. God, they did keep that.
I think for the VMware folks, it's been, I think sort of doubly challenging because as the pandemic hit, right? Like I think one of the things that VMware did really well was sort of look at this and be like, hey, you know what? Like being in the office isn't why we collaborate well together. It's not why we've been successful. We're going to embrace remote work. And, told people, yeah, it's okay. You can move away from an office. You can move somewhere else. You don't have to, like, this isn't a problem. Like VMware is going to support remote work. And that was VMware's stance. Obviously, we didn't know, they didn't know what Broadcom was going to mandate or any of these other things, or even if the acquisition was happening at that point. But I think then for people coming through the acquisition, right, who had just moved away, I think the change was sort of doubly painful, right? Where it's one thing to sort of say, hey, yeah, like I did it before, I have the option to do it again if I want to continue working here, versus, well, you told me that I could do this, I moved away, and now you're basically telling me I have to move back, or, I don't have a role with the company anymore.
And by the way, I mean, how many people that move away do so because, my spouse has, her residency is in a remote community, or I need to be with my mother is ailing, I want to be close to her. I mean, it's like people move because of their own sense of duty to their broader families, I think so frequently.
And I think it was one of those things, again, where other companies are saying, hey, you have to work in the office. It was one of the things where we could say, well, we're different, right? And that attracted people who wanted to come work with us. And so I think that transition's been hard. And then, I think the second piece, again, is like it being, again, akin to a dress code or sort of, a rule that the principal told you, as opposed to, managers and leadership being accountable for making coming to the office a valuable, productive thing that, adds value and actually benefits the culture. And so I think there's been a fair amount of resistance and frustration. The flip side is like the economy isn't necessarily where it was. And so, for some folks, that's also a concern. So I think people are complying with it, but it's sort of like trying to figure out how to follow the rule, not trying to figure out how do we get back to Z-ball or chariot races and the other things that sort of made the office what it was, and how do we give people that experience? And so, again, I think because people don't see the or believe in the motivation behind it. The way that they're approaching it is sort of, how do I toe the line, as opposed to, hey, look, Z-Ball was really fun.
Well, and you've got some folks in the chat some folks who are either in cultures that have an RTO or at Amazon specifically, that are asking like some pretty good questions. Like, hey, we quantify things at this company. Can you quantify some of this for me? Can you quantify this? Like, great, I'm all for making us more productive. And then being told by management, like, no, this isn't about quantification. Like, this isn't about, Emily in the chat saying, hey, stop asking for the numbers. This isn't about the numbers. And it's like, it seems to like it's been about the numbers for lots of other things around here. And it's like that really, again, undermines the faith that I have that this is a decision that's actually rational, let alone one that is in my best interest. It's like, this is not, I don't understand why we're doing this.
And there's just one thing that I want to say real quick. Like, I do actually kind of want to give a shout out to Hawk Tan, where, people ask this exact question to him, right? And, his answer is like, I get it. He's like, I don't have data for this. He's like, this is what I believe. This is the culture that I want. And I understand if it doesn't work for you, but it works for me. And it's not about these things. Like, this is the belief and the thing that I want to go do. That's why I'm doing it. And so I at least give him credit for saying that's behind it, and not sort of trying to come up with, but, innovation was better, or these other things. Whereas other folks, I feel like, have said,
okay,
hey, look, it was better, but I can't do anything. So, like, I give him credit for saying, this is how I think about it. If you don't like it, that's fine. But you're not going to change my mind.
Yeah, interesting. And then this is not a topic that's up for discussion, obviously. This is just like, take a hike if you don't like it, which I think is, okay. And maybe there's some folks that would do, but it feels like you're going to get some regretted attrition this way. You're going to lose folks that you don't want to lose.
I agree. But, again, where I give him credit is he says, yeah, people are going to leave. And if they're going to leave, that's the outcome. I'm fine with it. And so, again, like, at least to me, he's saying what he thinks will happen and understands the consequences of it and still wants to do it. He's not sort of making up reasons.
There's a real clarity, right? Like, he's not talking out of both sides of his mouth. It's not a 18-paragraph email. It's like, my way or the highway. Let's go.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. This is when management likes to use the leadership principles to be like, disagree and commit on this one. Don't, the data-driven principle isn't really applicable here. Which can be disheartening for employees.
Right. So on the leadership principles, because one thing Amazon had 14 leadership principles for a long time, and then kind of had this like late tack on of 2 additional leadership principles. One of which is bonus leadership principles. So which post-date my talk on them actually. And they're both kind of like nonsense, but one of them is to strive to be Earth's best employer. And which I think was honestly a consequence of some of these New York Times pieces that were some of these pieces that were revealing some of the really tough working conditions that people had, not just on kind of the AWS side, but Amazon writ large. And I think it was beginning to threaten their kind of pipeline of young folks. Chris, do you know if that's, that's a leadership principle, right? Is like, and has that leadership principle kind of, have people been like, hey, is this part of striving to be Earth's best employer? Because not really feeling that one here.
Yeah, that one doesn't come up as much in conversation, almost ever. I don't think in all my performance reviews I've ever ticked that box for anybody, just because I just don't. It's kind of hard to apply.
Are you tempted to try? Because it'd be like, no, that's not a leadership. We put that there for the New York Times. That's not an actual leadership principle.
It doesn't come up so often. No, I think that's kind of the frustrating thing. Our Slack is enormous at work, and like in our remote advocacy group, there's 35,000 people alone that are extremely upset about this. And a lot of the sentiment is like, you have this leadership principle, and you want us to be productive, like show us the data and be the best employer, and this is not feeling like that at all.
Okay, so another question on this. First of all, it's really interesting to hear kind of from the inside about how this is obviously not popular, and you've got this is very uprooting to people's lives, I'm sure. One of the comments he said is that we want to be like a startup again, and speaking as a startup, I don't know. The startups these days are kind of taking advantage of the fact that you larger companies have these dumbass RTO mandates. And I don't think Oxide is the only startup that is benefiting from some extraordinary people who are wondering what's next because they are leaving these established companies. Are the startups out there? I mean, it feels to me like startups are remote increasingly. I mean, Adam, you were broadly pretty remote, right? When you were
actually, you know what? We weren't that remote. We were like pretty in person, and we, got an expensive office space in downtown San Francisco, and people went to it. We had like some remote time, like people would work remotely on Wednesdays or whatever. But by and large, like it was in person. And I think I said at the time, I was looking at what you had done at Joyent, and I thought you had done a great job of having some folks in person and some folks remote. And I don't know. I was just like, I wasn't sure how to operate in a team like that, especially very early on. Now, I think that's changed for me. That's changed, I think, for the industry broadly. But even in that 2016, 8 years ago when I was starting the company, I felt like that was a choice you could make between whether you were mostly in person or mostly remote, and you'd hire different folks or whatever. But it was kind of a viable choice. I'm not so sure how viable it is as a choice these days.
To be remote or to be in person?
Oh, pardon me. To be like to say we're in person. Yeah, obviously, yeah. I think being remote is like, I mean, it feels to me, I'm like very much biased on this one, but it feels like more the default answer, whereas in person was the default answer previously.
Yeah, I think so too. So, and Chris, inside, because I know that historically, when some of these mandates came down, there were some exceptions that people were able to get, and the reality was the folks that needed the exceptions were always able to get them. Is that what's the thinking on whether that's going to continue, or are they trying to crack down on some of those exceptions?
Well, so you saw in that note they mentioned people with exceptions, and that's good that might stay. I mean, one of the big things, which is like a sad reality, is in these channels for remote advocacy, it's like people sharing advice on like, hey, like, does this qualify as something I should go talk to HR about? And there's actually people in there who's like full-time jobs, besides of course the normal job, to like give advice on like, hey, you need to go find these two forms and make sure you have a doctor approved thing and do this, because otherwise you just wouldn't know. So like I, for example, had a medical exemption because I've got this hand problem I've talked about before. And then it was up for review after a year. I joined during COVID with being hired remote, and then I was told that I need to come into the office 2 days a week.
Oh boy!
But then it took somebody on this thread to be like, oh, by the way, there's this like hidden secret box you can check on the bottom of this form that will like make the thing permanent. And so I'm super lucky that I got to do that like 6 months ago, and then like totally forgot about it. And now here we are. Thankfully I get to, hopefully, it's uncertain right now, so it's like ongoing conversations, but it's really shitty for everybody involved. And I always point to like, you can make remote happen, and Oxide's like one of those examples I point to. It's like they do hardware and they're remote. Like we're doing purely software over here. Like, what's the issue?
What's the answer to that, out of curiosity?
The answer to why can't we be remote?
Yes. Like, I mean, it just like when you try to get it to ground of like, can we just talk about some of this, the magical collaboration that only happens in person? Can we just get to some concrete examples of that? Is that where, I mean, why am I even asking this? Of course, like,
I mean, I won't say anything too bad, but like to your point, like I assume it's management. I mean, like when they came out with this announcement, I personally am very vocal and was like, this is what you guys have been doing for the last like 6 months on the S team. Like we're solving problems over here, and you're still thinking about this. We thought we were over this. I guess not. But I think so. The reason I raised my hand initially was I think one of the reasons they keep going back to this is they claim that it's like a culture thing, and they want to keep the culture of a startup. I want to get your take on this too, because I guess I just, I grew up in an age of, I was born in the late 90s. I grew up in the age of the internet and playing online video games and having communities. Like I have culture with people that I've never seen in person.
Yep.
Like, is this just like an older CEO thing where they don't think you can have a vibrant culture online and they don't know how to do it? Because I certainly think you can.
Chris, I think you're really onto something, and I think
I think it is.
I think it's both a generational thing and kind of one's own experience, but I think it's also the tools that have become commonplace in the way that we work, and yet people sort of having this nostalgia for a time and forgetting the absence of these tools, right? Like Brian, you were talking about how, talking in chat or on a Google Meet or in lots of these different kind of remote collaboration tools. Recall, like, we didn't really have that. Like when we would work remotely at Sun in the like early 2000s or whatever, like you would get on a conference call, but like there was no like video chat or anything. I think we did a little bit of like, I think we were on like AOL Instant Messenger and stuff, like randomly, like
that would have been
there.
Honestly, no, that would have been like, no, I was not on IRC, Jabber. I was on, when we were working remote, it was email. I mean, it was just like, if you want to go like really get tears in your eyes and it was email.
Yeah.
What was the way and we used email differently than it's used now.
Totally.
And you were much more current on email. There's a lot of email back and forth. So but email was very important. And I think that, and obviously, someone in the chat is saying like email, like not the thing that I have to put a confirmation code into in order to log into the website, like that thing, like that's why would you use that for? That doesn't make any sense.
I feel like people are going to, if someone comes to my house and like rings the doorbell, like my older son, who's now moved out, but like didn't know how to react, like total panic that like somebody would show up at your door. I feel like that's how people are going to regard email. Like, I'm receiving an email. This is like a highly aggressive like action.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think, but to the question, but you're right. We didn't have any of those tools. So it looked very different. And I think that I think you're right that this is just a generational shift, and people are, and this is why I think it's like, this is closer to a dress code than not. That they're absolutely, I mean, it's kind of amazing. This is where I do feel like I'm a fossil, that when I entered the workforce, it was a big deal that even by the mid 90s, when you went to an East Coast tech company, there was like, people were in like business casual to do work. I mean, it was not, you were only kind of just out of the era where engineers wore ties. And obviously I'm like, no, you just wear like blue jeans. Why? And I remember thinking as a 22-year-old in 1996, why is this company acting like it's a big deal they don't have a dress code? Like, of course you don't.
Yeah.
You're not, that's like, of course you don't. But that's like one of those generational shifts. I definitely think, Chris, it absolutely is a generational shift. I do think that the other thing, and this is like to get to that, back to that emotional issue, I think, is it Gloria Steinem? Is that aging is not for wimps? Who is that? Is that Bette Davis? I feel, is that it's either Ben Franklin or Mark Twain or Eleanor Roosevelt. One of them. Anyway. Aging is not for wimps. And I think that it is really hard to age as a technologist, because you do, like, especially, and this is why it's so important to me personally, to stay like on the details, because once you have a couple of years where you're off the details and you're no longer making individual contributions, it becomes really, really daunting to think about like going back, and you don't really know what your role is anymore, in the office space. I'm a people person, and like, what is my role? And I think that there's a great solace to knowing, oh, my role is there are a bunch of people here in cubicles, and I walk around from cubicle to cubicle. This is the HP, famously. I can't remember
the management from walking around. Yeah.
And you walk around, hey, how's it going? And that is how you managed. And I think that that doesn't work in this world. And I think that I think you've got an entire generation that's having a hard time coming to grips with it. And that's why I really wonder about new company formation. This idea of like, we want to act like a startup. It's like, well, funny you should mention startups, because startups are all going to work remotely. And or at least have a big remote component. I don't know how things are going to, because obviously our physical office is still important to us. I'm here now. It's a lab. I mean, it does, and it functions as a meeting space, right? We're going to have our meetup here in a couple of weeks, which everyone is really looking forward to. And, we have all that goodness that comes from being together. I think that it's like, I don't think anyone wants to say that there's no value in physically being together. It's just that that does not make sense for 100% of your at work activities. I also think the other, by the way, and Chris, I'd love to get your take on this. And does this come up? Because the other thing that's changed is the expectation of what are the hours of work? And, it used to be when you left work, because you did not actually have a computer in your pocket and because you did not have a computer at your home, you were actually unreachable and you were actually off work. And that is not true for us now. Obviously, people are always connected all the time and they're expected to be. And Chris, is there any kind of pushback internally being like, all right, hey, look, you want me to come to the office? Great. By the way, laptop closes at 6 p.m. So I'm, sorry. This has got to cut both ways.
So I definitely, there's two things. One of them, I personally, so I work remote. I personally get annoyed when people have to go into the office because usually they'll sign on before they leave, and then we'll get into a conversation about something, and then they'll be like, "Oh, hey, by the way, I have to get in the car and drive 45 minutes. So can I call you back then, or can I call you in the car?" I'm like, "Oh gosh, we were just getting started on something interesting here, and now you have to commute for an hour. I'll talk to you later." I definitely think, from everybody I talk to on my team, it's on days when they go to the office, they're like, "Hey, I'm back at home now, so let's call it here." I'm signing off more solidly. So that's a benefit, but then add in the commute, and I think almost everybody says, I'd rather not commute.
Yeah,
right.
And there's a fatigue thing. I think for commuting too. I think it just grinds on you. Even if you're working, less hands on keyboard or whatever.
I think, Brian,
when I personally have to take public transportation in terms of commuting. Sorry, Matt, what were you saying?
No, I was going to say, I think it's actually interesting where I don't know if it's changed specifically, at this time I walk out, but I think it has eroded goodwill. So,
yeah.
Like any software organization, right? Shit hits the fan and people are working late into the night because, the main check-in pipeline is broken, or there's a critical customer escalation, or there's a deadline for a patch release that we need to hit. And, previously I think people sort of were much more willing to sort of, go the extra mile or say, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to work really hard this weekend because we really need to get this thing done. And then I'll just, I'll take a couple of days off next week." And, it all evens out in the wash. What I've seen is that goodwill is just gone, where it's
it's gone. Yeah.
It's no, if I stay up working until 2 a.m. because I need to make sure that this customer is healthy, you're telling me I need to be in the office the next day. Okay,
right, or I get an email that you were scanning my badges and everything and tracking me with a spreadsheet.
Exactly, and you get the phone call or the email saying why weren't you here on Tuesday? You don't get it being hey, thanks for staying up Monday night to midnight to make sure that the upgrade for this critical customer went through and we met their timeline. And so again, I think it gets to that notion where there's previously been trust, right? And that trust is sort of the building block of everything. And this is one of the sort of silliest and fastest ways it seems to avoid that trust. And the result is people are now sort of okay, well, if you don't trust me to figure out where to be and when to work, why should I trust you that, you're going to reward me or at least support me for doing the right thing?
Totally.
And if you're the employer, maybe it's a hot take, but if I can't trust you to work when I'm not, micromanaging you and monitoring you, why do I even hire you?
Totally.
You're supposedly a professional and you're supposed to get things done. If you can't evaluate me based on work, I don't even know why we're in this relationship of employer-employee. This is a waste of time.
This example you're coming up with, I remember this moment in my career in particular where it was Sunday night, I was working on getting something done, and I got an email from my manager that said, "Hey, you took a day off on Tuesday and you didn't record it properly, and here's how you record it properly." And here I am Sunday night working my ass off, and I just remember feeling just so enraged by that moment.
Yeah, and that was at Sun.
No, actually, it was at Delphix.
That makes a little more sense.
Yeah. The folks at Sun wouldn't be paying attention. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. It's the manager themselves, implies that they're working on a Sunday night, but they send you that email on a Sunday night, so it's nothing to be doing that.
That's right.
Someone had asked in the chat about like, hey, what was remote work like at Sun? And so when I was there, like literally when I arrived, the engineers in kernel development had just gotten approval to have the ISDN lines so they could actually meaningfully work from home. When I was there, the engineers had started to work from home, but I did not for the first. And it's kind of amazing to think, like, Adam, how it feels like it was such a long period of time, and it was such a kind of a blink of the eye that like in 1996. The engineers had just started to work from home. Bonwick the engineer, Jeff Bonwick, who I'd come to Sun to work with, Jeff would get in at like 2 p.m.
Yeah.
2 to 3 p.m. He'd kind of like hang out in the evening and then he'd go home at like 7. And then he just to like wait out traffic. And then he'd be up until, I'd be working with him over email and also the phone. Adam, that's the other thing. We did use the phone.
Right.
He would call me and we would talk on the phone at
to be clear, on your landline, just to be clear.
On my landline in the office. And because I could not work from home because I just did not. So I was in the office more or less all the time. And I would be in the office until, 4 or 5 in the morning. And so the first year that I was working Bonwick hours, which was really stupid because
Bonwick Standard Time is not.
Bonwick Standard Time is not actually like, it's not diurnal. It is not actually. So I would end up, because I had a reverse commute. It would take me like 6 minutes to get into the office unless I was going into the office at 4 p.m. and it took me 45 minutes. And I'm like, I have got to be like, I got to get off this and I got to get something that looks more like rational human kind of hours. But people had started to work remotely. And then Adam, by the time you came in 2001, and we had DSL. I remember when we got our new place in San Francisco in 2000, like I got DSL, that was a big deal. And we were starting to work remotely a couple days a week.
Yeah. And we thought those remote access like token cards, those one-time password cards was somehow load bearing for a long time for how Sun IT would let us get in remotely.
Yeah, I saw Dan McDonald this year set up that
would predated the punch-in stuff. Like
it did predate punch-in. You're right. Yeah, you're right. You're right. We had some kind of VPN stuff. And then I definitely remember, you were the messenger on Wi-Fi. You were describing Wi-Fi, and I'm like, you came from the future. This sounds like there are no wires plugged in your laptop at all. Like that's no way. That's not possible. And I wrote Wi-Fi. was just like, wow.
Yeah.
And then so by the time so things were pretty hybrid from that point. I remember a lot of D-Trace we did in our working at home for sure.
I think my critique of remote work at the time was that it was very haphazard, right? Like because like the benefit of going to the office was conversing with certain folks or collaborating with certain folks. But then if it turned out like, oh, they didn't go in that day.
That's right.
Then you'd sort of feel like, why did I get on the train? What am I doing here? Like, why did I work to get down here?
When we started Fishworks, I remember really being explicit about like, we want the office to be that kind of gathering place. And yes, we're going to do work from home, but we're going to work from work. And that it gave us fish pong, just as the world, just as our working office gave us sea ball and the marker came.
Yeah. Well, we talked about Oxide. You founded Oxide, as it turns out, sort of moments before the pandemic. And I do wonder, like, if we were starting Oxide today, what would the office situation look like? Or if you were starting it in March 2020 rather than late 2019, like maybe would have got an office. Maybe there would have been a place that we needed to like warehouse materials or do some of this bring up or whatever. But it would certainly have looked differently, because when you got that office in 2019, sure, you thought we're going to have whatever it is, 50% remote, 20% remote, but you envisioned a building, a room with a bunch of people in it. Like that's what it was for.
We did. And we also, I remember thinking like, this will be good for the first like year or two. Then we'll need to get a bigger space.
Yeah. Much bigger space to accommodate.
And it's like, nope, we're not going to need to do that. And I think the thing that gets really weird to think about is like, what if there's no pandemic at all? And because that is like that takes us into bizarro land because we make a whole bunch of different decisions, and I mean it's actually horrifying. I actually it is actually too scary to contemplate if there's no pandemic. No, I'm serious because there were so many jobs that I had it in my head have to be local.
Yeah.
Operations had to be local.
That's right. Operations, a bunch of these
double E's had to be local. Yeah,
totally. You're right. It looks very different, and I'm not sure we are. Yeah.
No, it's scary. I don't like to my breathing accelerates just kind of thinking about it because like I don't know that we pull it off. I think that like actually I almost know that we don't. And I mean it's really, and the ability to get folks wherever they are is an absolute magic power that any startup is going to use. I mean, so I think part of the reason that I think this is going to shift so radically is because startups, so Chris, just for the generational issues you're mentioning, that like, hey, this is generationally, this just isn't that big of a deal to me. I'm born in the mid-90s. I play video games. I'm just used to like online communities. So like that is not a big deal for me. And so I think that one, you kind of have that big adjustment. Then you also have like, oh, wait a minute. The pool of talent that I want to hire from is they are making this incredibly bad decision that I can take advantage of and get people. I was like, oh, okay, wow, great. Thanks, Amazon. I didn't think I was going to be able to hire any of your folks, but thanks, Broadcom. Thanks, Google. Thanks. And, that because as a startup, you've got to find a way to differentiate yourself. And, you're obviously, there's a degree of venture funded startup, you're giving up a degree of job security. Obviously, you got to find a way to differentiate. And boy, being able to hire remote is a really, really, really key way to differentiate. And this is the bit I think with Andy Jassy. I'm like, do you think if you were a startup today, do you understand that you would probably you'd be a remote company?
Yeah.
And that I don't think he gets. Yeah.
So when two and a half years ago, when we were talking about this, Matt was on and he said that he hoped remote work wasn't just viewed as a cost savings. I think that at the time people were like shedding their offices and feeling that like that was a huge benefit. Not just a cost savings, but instead a way to hire the best people, as you're saying, Brian. And I think also in that episode, speaking to a question in chat about interns and something, Chris, you had mentioned about, I think, some of the generational differences. One of the questions we had was, what's it like for new employees? Like, what's it like for new college grads coming in? And I think at the time I was really worried about it. And I feel like that is maybe my okay boomer moment, because like these folks, especially like if you're a student who's graduating from college and you spent a big chunk of your time remote during the pandemic, like, you know how to do this. Like, you figured it out. This is how you operate.
Yeah.
And so like for the person in chat asking about the college intern starting, I think like you meet them where they are. You figure out how they want to work, because like they've already figured out how to do a bunch of this stuff. And yeah, for me coming out of school, it was so important to sit at the lunchroom table. It was so important to like stumble into people's office and ask dumb questions or whatever. But I think that like different generations figure out their own ways that are going to be different than the ways that we were familiar with doing them.
I think so too. And I think that like you look at, an evergreen for years and years and years, an evergreen about like, hey, I want to have a Hacker News thread that's going to have 1,000 comments. Talk about office layout, right? We open plan offices, cubicles, like everyone's at war with everyone else, right? And that's not something we need to, we've got other challenges in a remote world, but office layout is not something. And do you remember like, I don't remember we were talking about like, at Joyent, we kind of had these cubicles that weren't cubicles, they were dividers, where it was like an open plan where the dividers were of a very specified height. So you could kind of like keep your head down and headphones on, but you could also like look up. I mean, it was like all this like nonsense that we don't need to do anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
And, I think you guys mentioned it in your podcast a long time ago about the state of working remote. Where we're now, I just prefer people to be at home on calls because there's not background noise. And it turns out that conference room cameras are bad and you can't see facial expressions. And I actually prefer screen share for looking at people's code and pair programming because, they're not hovering over me or, God forbid, touching my keyboard. So there's just benefits that you don't see like that.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, and then all these things that we kind of talked about in that episode that I think people should go back and listen to, because I do think it's all the stuff that's now really important to us, like the side chat and the side channel and the back channel, the ability to record meetings, all the stuff that just can't live without. The other thing is that also, I was actually interacting with someone who was at a return to office company and was having a conversation with him, was scheduled to have a conversation with him. And he was like 4 minutes late. And, in the post-pandemic world, 4 minutes is like, okay,
call the cops. Where is this
call
person?
The cops. National disaster. Check Twitter. There's been an earthquake. It's like, this is cataclysmic. And he was very apologetic. He's like, God, I'm so sorry. I had to get a conference room, and I had this conference room booked, and these guys wouldn't leave because they went over. It's like, God, the idea that your that conversation, which is let's assume is a good conversation, is grooving, and has to stop now because somebody else needs to have a conversation, because it's like, oh my God, what are we doing? This just makes no sense in terms of, and I think this is what, what people are latching onto in terms of hey, this doesn't feel like it's making us more productive. Well, Adam, I'm not sure where do we think this is going to be a trend? Actually, let's leave on this. Does this portend a trend? Is this going to be an outlier? What is the future here for these RTO mandates?
Yeah, I do think it's a trend. I think that you're onto something with regard to this emotionality and justification of one's role. I think the finance folks who have invested in a bunch of real estate, I think it's the confluence of these things is going to keep pushing for these RTO mandates. And then whether it turns out to be like Hock-Tan's My Way or the Highway, or a softer mandate but don't enforce, like Scott McNeely would do if he were still in charge, I think that's a big question for me. What do you think?
I think we land pretty hybridy, where I think that there's a lot of new company formation ends up being remote first for all the good reasons to be remote first. And I think that alone will, and I think also I do think that companies are going to look different in the future. I don't know that we're going to have these massive 100,000 person tech companies where I think you're going to have more smaller companies. I think that's what makes more kind of sense in the abstract anyway. And so I think it's going to be, I think, hybridy. I think you're going to have a lot more. I think some of the stuff is going to look really, really dated in hindsight. I also think that there are going to be companies that have no RTO mandate. So I think that these RTO mandates are going to, at some level, backfire. I don't know if they're going to backfire quickly enough to kind of give feedback to the folks that instituted them. One company we have not talked about. Do you know a company that does not have that is truly hybrid and has not had any RTO mandate since the pandemic? NVIDIA.
Interesting.
NVIDIA is. It's like, oh, that's interesting.
How are they doing? I haven't checked.
I haven't checked. Are they doing okay? I don't know. Are they? I don't know. Are they having any success? And that's pretty interesting. And I think that I do think we're going to have a qualitative shift. Not for the first time. I think we've had a lot of these qualitative shifts. The internet was a qualitative shift where it's like you had companies that got it, succeeded, and companies that didn't, perished. And I think that I don't know that these hyperscalers are. I mean, obviously, Amazon's a wildly profitable company. I don't know they're in danger of perishing, but I do think that this approach, this kind of coercion approach, is going to undermine trust to the degree that I don't know that it's going to work. I think it's going to backfire.
Yeah, so, I think offices, much like cities, should be inhabited by people who want to be there. So.
That's a very concise way of putting it. That offices, like cities, that are not, because there are just like, Chris, it's an interesting analog because like cities, everyone kind of spent a bunch of time trying to flee cities, but actually young people are attracted to cities for a lot of the reasons that you're attracted to something that's got hustle to it and that's got verve to it, and Z-ball and chariot races.
I I think, Brian, I think the RTO stuff, when you say it's going to backfire, I think you have to look at like, how is it going to backfire? Where I think there's some companies that previously have been more focused on innovation and change and driving new things. And for larger companies that conceivably are transitioning away from that to a more stable business and, slow growth and just keep the machine moving forward, I don't know how much it'll backfire. Like, where I think it's going to hurt people is like, all the things that Amazon said in their memo about like, we want to have a startup culture and work fast and be innovative and do those things. That's where I think it's really going to hurt. There are a bunch of places where I don't think that's what they want.
That's not important. Yeah.
And so for those companies, I think it may work well because it'll attract the set of people that they're looking for to go do the job that they want. And so I think the RTO stuff, I don't know, like I think for some companies, it's not going to be a fad. It's going to be something that exists until sort of this generation of people in C positions ages out and the next generation decides that this is a company that they want to work at or not.
Yeah, no, well put. And I think it is going to really depend on what you're doing. And it's going to, there will be some companies that and there's some companies for whom dress codes make sense, right? I mean, it's like,
for any company Matt's at.
Yeah, and thank you for the intervention. It's a long time coming, and it's I have to do some soul searching.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, if you would please reflect on that. I assume that we're going to have at least some future episode only on dress codes with featuring Matt. Like I'm envisioning like fashion plate Matt, where I can put different outfits on Matt. Is that the?
I'm game, Brian. I have to figure out how to turn this corner. I think the only other thing here you guys talk about.
Yeah.
Hearing you talk about Sun when you talk about remote work starting, I also seem to remember that was around the time when cars left outside of Building 17 had their catalytic converter stolen. So I wonder if there's a correlation between the two.
No, that was because there were too few people in the office, so it was like semi-abandoned.
Is it okay? Well, sorry, here in the Bay Area, getting your catalytic converter stolen is like that'd be like the sun rising. So I had forgotten this. Was there a catalytic converter? Oh,
yes.
Okay. Yeah.
In fact, that was the place where I heard about catalytic converter thefts first.
Yeah, those thieves were innovators. They were ahead of their time.
Was in the Building 17 parking lot. Now home to Meta. You're welcome. I'm sure they don't have the same problems, but like. As people like stop, the remote work was sort of like self-perpetuating because once you go in a couple times and the people you wanted to see weren't there, then you're like, well, I'm just going to stay home too. People didn't show up. They started turning off the lights to save power, and people's catalytic converters started getting stolen. It was very bleak.
It was very bleak. It was very bleak. Yes. Well, and I think that I would like to say that those thieves really were innovators, and I would like to believe that. Somewhere there's another podcast going on with catalytic converter thieves reminiscing about Sun Microsystems back in the day, which is like this flightless bird where you could just go, you had all the time, all day to just, put it up on jacks, really do it right, back in the day, there was real attention to the craft of
talk about a podcast I would listen to. That'd be great.
Oh, absolutely. Well, low bar. Well, this has been, I don't know if this has been cathartic, uplifting. I don't know, where do we land on this? This has been, certainly, I think I would say that for those folks that are going through this, I definitely, heart goes out to folks who for whom this is really a challenge for their lives. And I think that this too shall pass in that regard. I think that remote work is here to stay at some level in our industry. So don't let this get you too far down, but this is it's a little bit of a downer at the moment.
Yeah. But agreed. I think this too shall pass, and I think that companies will distinguish themselves by being remote friendly, even as in this trend. Then hey, go work for NVIDIA.
Go work for NVIDIA, and next podcast we'll have Dave Hitz on here on RTO mandates. So we'll. Dave Lightman will bring back Dave Hitz.
There we go.
All righty. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, especially Chris and Matt. I really appreciate both of you. I mean, it takes real courage to kind of get up on stage here. Although I feel that, Matt, I would like that your Broadcom overlords should note your praise for Hock Tan's honesty and your respect for the Broadcom dress code. So I would like to explain that to your overlords as they are poring over this podcast. That you are actually an obedient servant. You are not a ne'er-do-well or a miscreant, rabble rouser.
Just like that at the deposition, Brian. That was perfect. That's exactly what I'm looking for.
There you go. Okay, it's just like that. But with even more feeling, or like, okay, that sounds good. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to sign the affidavit that you are welcome. Your Octane overlord. Are excited about the dress code.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. And thanks for all the great comments in the chat. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.